Most people are still looking at the ceasefire as if it settled something, and it did not. The guns may have gone quieter, but the real fight simply moved into a narrower, colder space, the Strait of Hormuz. The energy choke point through which global markets, shipping insurers, and military planners now read the same message in different languages. On the 27th, a new phase came into focus. Weeks after the ceasefire between the United States and Iran, the battlefield was no longer defined by open strikes alone, but by a frozen confrontation at sea, in the air, and inside the financial circuitry that keeps a state functioning. In the last 24 hours, Tehran moved through regional intermediaries with what looked like a step-by-step proposal, the first clear sign of an attempted strategic exit under pressure. The offer was simple on the surface and loaded underneath. Iran signaled that it was willing to reopen international shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, but only if the United States fully ended the blockade on Iranian ports. If accepted, that trade would effectively close the current stage of confrontation while pushing the nuclear issue into a vague future. And in geopolitics, later often means never return to in any meaningful way. So that is the first thing to understand. The shipping lane is the visible drama, but the pressure point is elsewhere. Beneath the diplomacy, Iran's oil system appears to be under severe strain, with interrupted flow, storage nearing capacity, and crude turning from a strategic asset into a trapped burden inside its own infrastructure. Oil only gives leverage when it moves. When it cannot move, it becomes a logistical choke, then a fiscal choke, then a political one. That is the strategic bottleneck pressing on Tehran now, and it explains why a state that speaks in defiance is also searching for a way to breathe. Washington, meanwhile, has not needed a new headline strike to maintain pressure. The continued presence of F-35 aircraft overhead, marine elements in the theater, destroyers, attack groups, and advanced unmanned systems has created a layered squeeze designed to signal one thing: verify everything, trust nothing. Every Iranian move is watched, mapped, and measured. This is not only a military posture, it is a system of controlled compression, economic coercion on one side, visible combat power on the other, and constant surveillance above and below the waterline in between. That pressure is beginning to expose fractures inside Iran's own power structure. Repeated negotiations have been canceled, slogans have replaced substance, and the pattern now suggests not resolution, but accumulation. Tension is being stored, not released, and that usually means the next phase is harder to predict and harder to control. After a canceled trip and a string of public signals, Donald Trump made the American position sound deliberately simple. The door to negotiation, he suggested, is not closed, but the initiative now belongs to Iran. Make contact, return to the table, or return later from a weaker position. Whether that is diplomacy or staged pressure depends on where you stand. But the message was unmistakable. At the same time, economic losses are being discussed in increasingly stark terms. Some assessments suggest that hundreds of millions of dollars are being drained from the system each day, with figures reaching roughly $500 million daily in the most severe estimates. That kind of financial bleeding does not stay in balance sheets for long. It migrates into procurement, patronage, salaries, and internal cohesion. Iran, of course, is not publicly accepting that reality. Officials continue to accuse the United States of piracy through maritime blockade, and they characterize Washington's demands as excessive and insincere. The rhetoric remains confrontational because rhetoric is one of the few instruments a pressured state can still deploy at full volume without paying immediate battlefield costs. In parallel, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has been moving across the regional and Eurasian board, Pakistan, Oman, and now Russia. The purpose is plain enough: widen diplomatic space, gather political backing, and, if possible, convert that backing into strategic depth. Over the Strait of Hormuz, the air picture tells its own story. American fighters continue to maintain a strong presence, and that presence is not symbolic. It is a constant reminder that the current crisis is being managed through deterrence by proximity, and that Tehran is facing a level of sustained multi-domain pressure that feels very different from periodic sanction cycles or isolated strike episodes. The larger strategic picture around Hormuz is therefore more severe than the ceasefire language suggests. The United States has built a maritime containment campaign around one of the world's narrowest and most consequential energy corridors, control a small stretch of water there, and you can alter tanker schedules, freight costs, insurance premiums, state revenues, and risk calculations from the Gulf to Europe to East Asia. Iran's response has included another version of the same bargain: reopen the lane, ease the squeeze, but do not touch the nuclear core. That is the real hierarchy of priorities in Tehran. The nuclear program is not being treated as a technical file or a bargaining chip of convenience. It is being treated as a regime survival asset. And that distinction matters. Iran does not appear to be searching for a classic nuclear settlement in the traditional sense. It appears to be seeking a formula that preserves its core capabilities while reducing immediate economic suffocation, a compromise in which maritime flow is restored and strategic ambition remains intact. From Tehran's perspective, the calculation may look rational. The United States, in this view, will always care deeply about energy flows through Hormuz, global oil prices, and broader economic stability. Therefore, Iran tests whether freedom of navigation can be exchanged for tolerance of its nuclear trajectory. From Washington's perspective, the answer is likely close to zero. A deal that restores shipping while permitting continued nuclear development would solve the symptom and preserve the threat. That is why the blockade patrol structure and layered military presence have remained central to American strategy at this stage. At sea, the pressure architecture is becoming denser. Destroyers, submarines, and marine-linked formations have been concentrated around the strategic choke point. In the air, F-35B aircraft and other platforms are using advanced sensors to monitor movements across the entire zone, shrinking the room for concealment and reducing the value of tactical ambiguity. Yet the shipping lane may not be the most important place to watch. A quieter and more sensitive focus sits inland, near Natanz, around what has been identified as Mount Pickaxe. This area is believed to contain underground facilities tied to uranium work and to the latest stage of Iran's nuclear development effort. Natanz had already suffered attacks, especially against ventilation shafts, which are critical to deep underground infrastructure. But beneath the exposed and damaged layers lies the deeper concern. A cave network reportedly around 91 meters below ground, associated with uranium-related facilities and hardened against conventional pressure. This is where the strategic logic sharpens. While international attention concentrates on Hormuz and the maritime showdown, Tehran has strong incentive to pull eyes away from the nuclear sites. Reopening shipping can be presented as de-escalation, but it may also serve as a diversion, a way of lowering immediate scrutiny on work happening under rock, concrete, and time. Iran's refusal to place the nuclear program squarely inside renewed talks with the United States reinforces that reading. The line is red because the program is seen as leverage, deterrent, potential, and insurance policy all at once. In Tehran's internal logic, if future pressure is inevitable, then future pressure must meet a stronger Iran than the one being pressured now. That is why delay matters so much. Delay allows engineering, concealment, transfer, reinforcement, and political adaptation. Delay buys options. And in a confrontation like this, options are often more valuable than public victories. On social platforms and in state messaging, the line from Tehran has been consistent. Open the Strait of Hormuz, reduce economic pain, but do not demand strategic surrender. Iranian officials insist there is nothing improper about their sensitive programs, even as they keep those same programs outside the center of any practical compromise. President Masoud Pezeshkian added another visible layer by publicly thanking Vladimir Putin and the Russian people, saying their support inspired Iran in this conflict. That statement was more than ceremonial. It signaled that Tehran wants Moscow seen not as a distant observer, but as an active source of political backing during a period of maximum pressure. Behind the scenes, reports have circulated that thousands of surface-to-air missiles and man-portable air defense systems could be moving toward Iran. If true, that would fit a familiar pattern. For Russia, a deeper American entanglement with Iran creates bargaining space elsewhere, especially in relation to Ukraine and future territorial negotiations. In that sense, Iran is not just a regional crisis, it is also a bargaining instrument inside a larger geopolitical matrix. Moscow does not need to own the crisis to benefit from it. It only needs the United States to devote more time, more attention, and more resources to managing it. And then there is the information war, where the tone becomes stranger. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps circulated a stylized propaganda video using toy-like visual framing and dramatic narration, built around a story of rescuing a weapons officer and framing the episode as a uranium theft attempt by outside forces. The claims escalated quickly. According to the narrative, American Special Operations Forces entered deep into Iranian territory, attempted to seize enriched uranium, used excavation equipment to recover it, and suffered a dramatic defeat, including the downing of aircraft. The presentation blended triumph, mockery, and cinematic absurdity. Measured against battlefield realities, much of it collapses under its own weight. If the underground areas were already hit, if ventilation systems were destroyed, and if heavy bunker-penetrating ordnance in the range of roughly 13,600 kilograms had already compromised access and survivability, then any remaining material would likely be buried, fragmented, contaminated, or transformed into a hazardous recovery problem rather than a clean extraction target. That is the second thing to understand. Propaganda in wartime is not designed to withstand technical scrutiny. It is designed to preserve narrative control, reassure domestic audiences, and create just enough noise that foreign audiences stop trusting their own ability to distinguish fact from theater. The same propaganda stream also leaned into ridicule, mocking the appearance of opposing soldiers, joking about beards, joking about uranium, joking about commandos. On the surface it looked unserious, but the underlying purpose was serious enough: shape perception, degrade the opponent's prestige, and bait the United States toward a ground commitment. That bait matters. Tehran knows the phrase "boots on the ground" carries historical trauma across the American public sphere. Iraq, Afghanistan, long wars, open drains, no clean exits. Any narrative that suggests America can be lured into another land entanglement is a strategic message as much as a propaganda one. The broader battlefield evidence, however, points in another direction. No confirmed American losses of the dramatic kind described in those narratives have been publicly established, while some reports suggest the Revolutionary Guard sustained significant casualties, with estimates running from more than 100 to around 200 personnel. In information war, volume is often used to compensate for weakness. Meanwhile, the pressure on Iran's oil revenue appears to be biting harder. Tehran's renewed signals about reopening Hormuz suggest the state trying to restore cash flow before energy paralysis turns into wider political paralysis. This is not only about export figures, it is about maintaining the machinery of internal control. When money stops moving, power starts stuttering. Funding for the Revolutionary Guard narrows, pressure on local systems rises, and the population becomes more aware of state weakness. A regime can survive public anger for a long time, but it struggles when elite cohesion, coercive funding, and economic function all begin to erode together. Inside Iran, surveillance remains dense, cameras are widespread, communications are watched, and the space for spontaneous political action is narrow and dangerous. For opposition-minded Iranians, that means timing matters more than sentiment. They may be waiting for a moment when the regime looks brittle enough to challenge and too distracted to suppress at full strength. American officials have described the blockade as solid, disciplined, and still expanding. The arrival of a third carrier into the broader area only reinforced that perception. This is not a loose demonstration of force. It is a sustained operating framework built to deny economic relief while preserving escalation dominance. Reports indicate that dozens of vessels have been intercepted or denied, with more than 35 ships attempting to enter or leave Iranian ports turned back. If those figures are broadly accurate, and if the associated revenue pressure approaches $500 million per day, then this is far more than a maritime inconvenience. It is a direct constriction of state breathing space. Rules of engagement also appear to have tightened. Lethal force has reportedly been authorized against any credible threat, including attempts to clear mines in sensitive waters. No major new direct clash has been publicly confirmed in that specific context, but the posture is unmistakable. Any move to reopen the lane by force risks immediate retaliation. That raises the central question. What exactly is Tehran calculating now? Is it seeking a narrow economic bargain, a pause to stabilize its nuclear work, or a broader strategic rescue through Russian support and regional mediation? Araghchi's visit to Moscow suggests that military reinforcement is at least part of the conversation. One focus has been advanced air defense, especially systems in the S-400 class. If Iran secured that level of protection, the regional air defense balance could change in meaningful ways, particularly around high-value sites. Iran is also believed to be interested in more portable air defense systems with advanced electro-optical sensing developed or shared by Russia and China, deployed in quantity around key nuclear sites such as Natanz and the Mount Pickaxe area. These could create a more layered defensive shield and complicate future strike planning. But while Tehran looks upward for defensive help, the American pressure below the horizon remains relentless. Destroyers enforce the blockade on the surface. Submarines operate quietly beneath it, conducting intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance on vessels moving in and out of Iranian ports. That invisible layer is one of the most powerful parts of the whole design. And it means Iranian fast attack craft have to think twice and then think again. The rules have changed. A vessel suspected of mine clearing or of enabling a maritime breach can become a target almost immediately. And once that threshold is crossed, reaction time is measured in moments, not hours. One of the less discussed aspects of the current situation is the role of new unmanned surveillance systems, especially underwater devices capable of attaching to targets, maneuvering through the Gulf, and feeding a near-continuous picture of movement below the surface. Deployed at scale and networked with submarines, they create a mesh of undersea awareness that is difficult to evade. When that undersea mesh is combined with airborne surveillance, advanced drones, and artificial intelligence-enabled command systems, the battle space changes shape. Systems can talk to each other, sensor feeds can be fused, responses can be synchronized from seabed to sky in near real time. That is where the language of a new kind of war begins to make sense. Swarming logic, machine-assisted tracking, aircraft like the F-35 and F-22, naval combat systems such as Aegis, and high-value support platforms all linked into a single operating web. In that environment, concealment becomes harder, reaction cycles shrink, and strategic pressure can be sustained without constant dramatic violence. The overall American method resembles a multi-dimensional chessboard more than a classic attack campaign. Instead of rushing into a large-scale strike package, Washington appears to be combining blockade, financial attrition, intelligence, dominance, and calibrated military threat. The goal is not immediate spectacle. The goal is cumulative exhaustion. That cumulative pressure is already changing Iranian behavior. Tehran, which previously sought to impose terms, is now increasingly offering concessions around maritime access in exchange for one indispensable objective: the freedom to continue the nuclear program. The very structure of the offer reveals where Iran feels strongest, where it feels weakest, and what it is determined to protect at almost any cost. From a strategic standpoint, that bargain remains difficult for the United States to accept. And freedom of navigation is important, but allowing ongoing nuclear development in exchange for it would leave the core security problem untouched. So the negotiation remains trapped in a narrow corridor, one where every opening seems to lead back to the same locked door. If the confrontation escalates again, American forces are already positioned for rapid response across the region. Pilots, flying fighters, bombers, and KC-135 tankers are reportedly studying the ways Iran could attempt to challenge air superiority, especially if outside support improves the range and quality of Iranian air defenses. Particular concern surrounds the protection of high-value support assets, such as airborne, early warning, aircraft, and aerial refueling platforms. These are the connective tissue of modern air operations. Threaten them, and you do not just endanger individual planes, you complicate the entire architecture of sustained precision warfare. That is why Russian assistance and Chinese intelligence support matter so much in current planning. Either could alter tempo, increase uncertainty, and push the United States from a posture of managed control toward more surgical early strikes designed to neutralize emerging threats before they are fully integrated. Inside the Pentagon, planners are almost certainly gaming those scenarios. Now, if conflict reignites, the objective would be to hit strategic nodes quickly and efficiently before layered defenses. Dispersed logistics and foreign technical support can harden the field. In modern warfare, timing is not just important, and timing is often the war. So where does that leave the Strait of Hormuz tonight in a state of suspended danger? Iran is signaling conditional flexibility, but only within limits that protect its deepest strategic priority. The United States is maintaining pressure, but without yet crossing into the kind of overt escalation that would narrow everyone's options at once. This is why the ceasefire should not be mistaken for peace. Peace resolves causes. This arrangement has merely paused one method of confrontation while intensifying several others. The shipping lane, the nuclear mountain, the Russian channel, the undersea surveillance net, the oil revenue drain, the propaganda theater, the pressure on internal cohesion, they are all connected dots on the same board. And that board reaches far beyond the Gulf. Energy prices, maritime insurance, alliance credibility, Russian leverage, Chinese observation, and the future of deterrence in the region all flow through this crisis. A narrow body of water has become a test chamber for a much wider order. For now, Tehran seems to want oxygen more than triumph. Washington seems to want compliance without occupation. Moscow seems to want leverage without ownership. Everyone is maneuvering. No one has solved the core contradiction. So the real question is no longer whether a ceasefire exists on paper. The real question is whether this pressure system breaks Iran first, breaks the blockade first, or breaks the wider regional balance first. That answer has not arrived yet, but the next few days may begin to show which structure starts cracking before the others.